All right, class, you've made it. It's the last unit of first semester, which means we're halfway done with the school year. And that's just got to feel good. I know a test is coming, but still, go with it. All right, we need to get through Unit 5. And so the first short answer question for Unit 5 deals with a world in denial, and it deals with Japan, Italy, and Germany. What it's really looking at is the aggression by these three countries, and of course noting the lack of response by the rest of the world. So you've got Italy taking Ethiopia, using the Suez Canal to get there and back to Italy, which Britain allows. The fact that the United States was the #1 supplier of oil to Italy before and after it took Ethiopia. You have to kind of look at some of these things and say, is that kind of an admission? Is that kind of saying that's okay? And so there's, why would the United States do that? Why would Great Britain do that? Well, you're in the middle of the Great Depression, and there's a global Great Depression. So oil sales are jobs. It's putting food on the table for people. So during times of economic hardship, how willing are you to look the other way for bad behavior because you want to pay the rent? Japan, taking Manchuria, the rape of Nanjing, where hundreds of thousands of civilians were killed, and the USS Panny incident, where Japan destroyed and sunk an American ship, clearly marked as an American ship, and resulted in the deaths of American sailors. And actually, we apologized to Japan for that. Our ship shouldn't have been there. It was our fault. It really does show you, as you look at the world once again, and the United States, we don't want any trouble. And the reason you don't want any trouble, we're in a Great Depression. We don't have money to go raise an army to go fight Japan. And we're very isolationist at this time. Remember, we have shrunk the size of our Navy. 4-power treaty, 5-power treaty, 9-power treaty, 1920s. And we become very isolationist, a return to normalcy. That was a part of a return to normalcy and the rejection of the Treaty of Versailles. So there really is kind of those elements. You can see them very easily here. Germany, they take Austria. The world says nothing. They rearm the Sudetenland. The world does nothing. They sign the Munich Pact. Don't even invite Czechoslovakia and gain the Sudetenland. They take the Sudetenland, I'm sorry, as part of the Munich Pact, and the world says nothing. And then they sign the Non-Aggression Pact with the Soviet Union. In all of these areas, as you take Austria, the Anschluss, you take the Sudetenland through the Munich Pact. You actually rearmed the Rhineland as well. The world does nothing, and particularly rearming the Rhineland violated the Treaty of Versailles. But again, the world is like, we were just a little too tough on Germany. And Austria, Germanic history, speak German, culturally more German. The Sudetenland filled with Germans. There's kind of maybe we took too much land from Germany after World War I. Maybe we were too hard on them. So you're going to look the other way while they do bad things. Now, the problem, of course, is you've got three countries that are expanding, and they're not going to stop. So I think one of the analogies I used in class is, the bully stealing your lunch money, and every day you give the bully your money, you're really hoping this is it. This has got to be it. They're not going to do this again tomorrow. And so we see those issues of kind of the post-World War I, maybe we were too tough on Germany, the isolationism, we don't want to be involved in the rest of the world, so we're more likely to, fight or flight. We're more likely to be in the flight side of that equation. Isolationism in the U.S. Now, we just got done talking about isolationism. Well, we're kind of following a path here. So you had that thing called the Nye Committee, and you'd want to cover that in your answer. And the Nye Committee findings were pretty simple. The main reason we got involved in World War I was trade and loans. We gave huge loans to the Allies and the Allies only. Now we need them to pay us back, and if the Allies look like they're going to lose, well, now we got to bail the Allies out or we're not going to get paid. We also traded with them and did not trade with the other side, and the other side sank our boats with their U-boats, and then, dead American sailors, ships at the bottom of the Atlantic, lost items economically, and then eventually we got into war. Think Sussex Pledge or Lusitania or things like that. Well, if you don't want to go to war, and these are the findings, this is how you don't go to war. And I want you to notice the slow shift. So Neutrality Act of 35, no weapons. If two countries are at war, we don't trade weapons with either side. Well, okay, but there's a loophole here. What if they got a loan from the United States and bought their weapons from someone else? Isn't that essentially the same thing? Well, okay, here's a way around that. No money to people at war. Now they can't use that loan money to buy weapons. Well, then I call this the bleeding hearts one. Well, what about medicine and food? Okay, starving children. All right. Fine. We will trade medicine with anybody. We will trade food with anybody. We're good humanitarians. But you gotta pay cash up front. You gotta carry it on your own ships. Now, this isn't cash and carry. I put little c here. But we will trade medicine and food with you. Well, that is some involvement. That's turning this a little bit. Well, 2 years later, in 1939, now World War II has started. Poland's been invaded. Everybody's declaring war on everybody, except for the United States at this point. So then we pass cash and carry. Cash and carry is we will sell you whatever the heck you want, including weapons. You just got to pay cash up front and carry it on your own ships. And if your ships get sunk, it was your ships with your sailors, and it was your stuff. We already got paid. And then when they run out of cash, we'll go to Lend-Lease. We'll lend you the stuff. You can pay us back later. Well, obviously, somewhere between here and here, you're really no longer neutral. In fact, you can't even call Lend-Lease a Neutrality Act. So it's pretty clear something is shifting between 1940 and 1941. To go from cash and carry to Lend-Lease. Also realize cash and carry is probably pretty intriguing because this is going to do more to end the Great Depression than anything else that we did in any of Roosevelt's plans that we studied in our previous unit. Hey, the reasons the U.S. were against war is our third short answer question for the test. So there's a lot of reasons why, and some of these reasons are valid. Some of these reasons are not. So like anything else, I wrote down here at the bottom, groups may or may not agree with each other. This is a coalition of people against the war. The question is, up until 1940, 1941, they are a clear majority of the population. You've got the America First Committee. They had chapters across the United States. And Charles Lindbergh, one of the heroes of the 1920s, a Minnesotan, is, their main spokesperson and very recognizable. Hey, we're in the middle of a Great Depression. If we've got $1 to spend, let's feed a starving child in Oklahoma. Who cares what's going on in Poland? Or what's going on in Manchuria, or what's going on in Ethiopia. Is it sad? Yes. But we've got our own problems here. Put America first with America's resources and America's needs. We're in the middle of a Great Depression. Okay, that sounds intriguing, and to a certain degree, it makes perfect sense. Pacifists. We had pacifists in World War I. We had pacifists during the Vietnam War. Some people believe war is wrong. And a large percentage of pacifists are devout Christians. Turn the other cheek and that type of thing. So for religious reasons, usually citing their Christian beliefs, although there are other religions where this would also be a violation. There were Jewish pacifists. There were atheist pacifists. There were others as well. So the idea war is wrong and I don't want to go to war, and killing is killing and I don't want to kill people for moral and ethical reasons. Well, pacifists have always been around. I'm sure they always will be around. Political progressives. Now these are people that are like, notice we've completely changed now. Killing is wrong. Put America first. Hey, if we join World War II, just like in World War I, the government's going to grow in size. And I don't want the government to grow in size. Governments always grow in size during wars. So I don't want a war because I don't want a big government. Notice these people now, all three of these groups agree. But this person isn't because killing is wrong or I want America first. I just don't want big government. And war would bring big government. Some conservatives are also going to, look at, I don't know if I like this idea. And some conservatives were very anti-communist. And Hitler's fighting the communists after 1939. So, hey, just step back here. Let the fascists fight the communists. Let the two people that we don't really get along with fight each other. Why are you stopping them? So let's stay out of this war because I don't like communists, and the communists are currently getting clobbered. So just let it happen. Why would you stop it? And yes, here's a horrible one. There were people that were anti-Semitic in the United States, and Hitler was taking a strong stance against the Jews. Why stop him? And I agree with what he's doing. Now, this is prior to death camps. This is during, after the Nuremberg laws, which are bad enough, don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to sugarcoat this in any way, shape, or form. But there were people in America that agreed. And, go to the KKK and go to those other things that, we've studied, unfortunately, along the way. And there were people that this fit into their playbook, and they were okay with that. So it's just things that are unfortunate, and I always worry with these kinds of conversations that we're having in virtual form, and I'm not here to come see me if you want any additional explanation or discussion about that. It's always hard to run over these and hope that things come across. Some conservatives are not bad. They just didn't like communism, and 1950s, nobody liked communism then either, at least in the United States, a vast majority of the population. All right, number 4 is a comparison contrast of World War I again, this time Wilson's 14 points during World War I and Roosevelt's Atlantic Charter from World War II. Now, I color-coded this thing to make it easier and we can get through it faster. And just real quick reminder, abolish secret treaties, freedom of seas, removal of economic barriers, reduction of armament burdens, adjust colonial claims, and the League of Nations. This is what we went over in World War I 2 units ago. Now notice the similarities, and I'm going to kind of bump around a little bit here. Freedom of the seas, word for word, same thing. Removal of economic barriers, trade barriers lowered with colonies. Pretty much the same thing. Slightly reworded, same idea. Reduction of armament burdens, protection of human rights. Okay, not quite the same thing. Adjustment of colonial claims, self-determination for all people. This is actually a step beyond that. League of Nations, new League of Nations will be called the United Nations. Abolish secret treaties, no territorial change without vote, which goes a long ways to go with self-determination. On the whole, the Atlantic Charter looks an awful lot like Wilson's 14 points. It's a slight addition to. So if this is chosen as a question, you'd want to be able to go through the FDR's Atlantic Charter and be able to say how similar it was to Wilson's 14 points, and of course, give a few specific examples. The one other thing that's important to note is Wilson had his idea for his 14 points after World War I is over, after they don't need our stuff anymore. They don't need our loans anymore. They don't need our soldiers anymore. The war is over. And they want something to show for that fight. So they want the Treaty of Versailles. They want to make Germany suffer because at least they have something to hold up for the loss of life that they had. FDR is now proposing this Atlantic Charter before our involvement in World War II. They need us. So, hey, you're going to have to sign it. And they don't really have a choice. The only part of Wilson's 14 points that were adopted by Europe was the League of Nations, and then ironically we didn't join it. Number 6, Stalin versus Churchill. The reasons Stalin wanted a quick second front and the reasons Churchill wanted to move slower. If we look at Stalin and Churchill, and of course, Soviet leader, British leader, the reason Stalin wanted a quick second front is, the Germans were within sight of Moscow. They could see the spires of the Kremlin through their binoculars. They got so close to it. They were in the suburbs of Moscow before they were stopped in 41, 42. The Germans almost take Stalingrad in 42, 43, and just beyond Stalingrad, was a key oil field and some railroads that if they'd been able to sever, you would have cut the Russian army off from its oil supply. And then it would have ground to a halt in just a matter of days, let alone hours. And there's 20 million Russians who are going to die in World War II. You know, we lost a few 100,000, and I'm not diminishing that number in any way. We lost a few 100,000 people in World War II. Can you imagine what it would be like if we'd lost 20 million people? I mean, they're screaming for relief. So you can understand why Stalin wanted a quick second front that would force Germany to move troops away from Russia and towards that second front. He's currently taking the full brunt of the German military. Well, was Churchill just a bad guy? No, Churchill... The invasion of D-Day is going to be about 1 million people all told involved in the operation, from clerks and supply people to the actual soldiers themselves. You need time to move resources into place. And if you jump the gun and do this invasion before you're ready and it fails, it's going to take you twice as long to prepare for a second invasion. So failure is not an option. This has to be a guaranteed success. So Churchill's like, hey, you want this done, it's got to be done right. I'm sorry, you're going to have to wait. So the kind of fallback is the invasion of North Africa. And it does a little to relieve some of the stress. You can do it in 42, very soon after even Pearl Harbor. But you can understand, and what I'd ask you to do in this question is very quickly, give these reasons, but be able to synthesize them into, does Stalin have a good point? And is this a valid point? Different points of view. And, even maybe which one should have won, or should have won the way it did, or should have been different than the way it was. Again, we like to argue those. Hey, the last thing we'll do in this video, and then we'll do a short second part 2, is if we look at the major battles of Europe. I would know 3, and I've got them marked in red dots here. Operation Torch, 1942, just referenced it. It is a small invasion in 42, November of 42, less than a year to the day from Pearl Harbor, and we're already invading North Africa. We're invading the European theater. Now, the problem, of course, is this is all desert up here. It's what, like, I forget how many gallons of water per person per day when you're in the desert. So just because you're in the desert, there are limits as to how many soldiers you can muster in any one spot. So yeah, the Germans do have to take some soldiers from here, 100,000 or so, 100,000 is 100,000, and move them down towards here. It does a little bit. It's also a psychological victory because of how soon it was. Stalingrad. This is really the turning point. It's the high water mark of the German war machine. After Stalingrad, which, as you can see, it took several months, Germany is in perpetual retreat. You might remember, and no, I don't make you memorize factoids, the German army suffered a lot fewer casualties than the Russians did. The Russians lost over 1 million people in Stalingrad, but the Germans could not afford to lose those numbers, even though they lost a lot less people. Germany has a far smaller population, so Germany can afford to lose people a lot less than the Soviets did. A lot of similarities, actually, to the American Civil War there. Germany is now in constant retreat. So this is the beginning of the end as far as the German war machine is concerned. So even by 42, 43, you can start to see a light at the end of the tunnel. It's a distant light, but certainly. And then Operation Overlord, or D-Day, and that is the major second front. I guess now we can call it a third front that Stalin had always wanted, but he wanted it far earlier, years earlier. It's the largest sea invasion in history, and this is going to pour, 1 million plus people will eventually get into Europe here. And now Hitler's going to have to move an awful lot of troops, from the front, which is now nearing here, and throw them over here as fast as he can. And by 44, actually, the Americans are fighting up Italy as well. So you've got a 3-front area that the German army is now being divided into thirds. Well, we're going to be done here. And again, those 3 battles are what you're going to want to reference and their place, why those are the 3 battles that make it as part of your answer.